But it's my pleasure at this time to introduce who's now become a good friend. I've seen him on several occasions in the last couple of months, Lee Rainey, who is the director of the Pew Research Center's Internet and American Life Project. This is a program that is sponsored by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, and they have done amazing work in analyzing the public's use of the internet and of libraries over the last couple of years and produced some very, very important research reports for us. This is a nonprofit, nonpartisan fact tank, as opposed to a think tank, that studies the social impact of the internet. Lee is the co-author of Network, the new social operating system that was released this spring by the MIT Press. He's also co-authored 5 books about the future of the internet that are based on project research. And before joining the Pew Internet project, he was managing editor at U.S. News and World Report. So without any further ado, I'd like to call up Lee Rainey.
That was fun. One of the amazingly wonderful parts of my job is that I get to meet people like Lamar and often get cold phone calls or cold emails inviting me to come to places like this. And when Lamar first introduced himself to me, I said, "You had me at Athens." My daughter is a dog. Even though she grew up in Virginia, she wanted to get as far away from her high school as she could on the East Coast, and she was such a happy person. Her sorority literally is down about a mile from here on Baxter Road. So I brought her with me. She's hanging out with her buddies today. It's great. It's too bad school isn't in session, so she could thumb her nose at the people who are still going here. She happily graduated about 5 years ago. And you heard Lamar describe Pew Internet as a fact tank. And what that has a special meaning to us. We don't want to be a think tank because think tanks, and especially in the Washington bestiary, are folks that think up policy solutions to problems, and they are policy entrepreneurs. So they deeply believe in what they're promoting and how they think about things. So they're by definition advocates of change. Pew Internet has been funded by, actually the original grant was from the Pew Charitable Trust, and we continue to get money from them. Pew is a family name, it's not an acronym. It's the guy who discovered oil in Pennsylvania at the same time the Rockefellers discovered oil in Ohio, drilled a lot of it out of the ground, shipped a lot of it around the country, made a lot of money out of it. It's the Sunoco fortune. And his children, grandchildren, and now great-grandchildren have created this wonderful philanthropy that does a lot of advocacy work, but they also do stuff just to fund primary research of the kind that we do in hopes that we will at least give a statistical, empirical basis for people to argue about what's going on. So in the founding documents of the Pew Internet project, there was a lot of talk about whether the internet was a good or bad thing for people. Was it making people isolated, ruining their lives, pulling them away from the real experiences of real life, or was it enhancing community and relationships and things like that? We don't have a view on that, but we have a lot of data now on that. And it's inspired by the guy who created the foundation is the son of the Pew who had the oil fortune. And his signature thought was tell the truth and trust the people. And that's the animating spirit of our work. We do a lot of this data collection, and we do reports that make arguments based on the data, but we do it in a way that we hope is useful to you and that you will apply in your lives however you choose. And then a couple of years ago, we got this grant from the Gates Foundation. And it's a wonderful thing because in the early days of the project, when we were just talking about how people were using technology, it became very clear after we began issuing our reports that librarians were the primary stakeholders for our work. Their lives, their institutions were being as deeply disrupted as the journalism business, which I had come out of, as the music business that we were just watching in the early days of Napster, what was going to happen to the music business. And librarians knew that that tsunami of disruption was going to hit them too, and so they were eagerly consuming all of our information about who used the internet and how they used it and for what purpose and what they were getting out of it. And so eventually the Gates folks said, well, you ought to do some special work focused on libraries. We said, sure, sign us up. So we got a wonderful grant from them 2 years ago, and that's what I'm going to be talking about today. But it's after lunch. Well, actually, I'll apologize first. As you can tell, I'm not from Georgia, and I'm actually a native New Yorker, and I just can't help myself. I speak too fast. I had a Pennsylvania librarian come up to me after a speech a couple of years ago and said, Mr. Rainey, I know what your next job could be. I said, ma'am, I'm an aging baby boomer, I don't want a next job. She said, nevertheless, what you can be is the side effects reader on drug ads. Okay, so I've been told this, right? A kindly soul has actually said this to my face. I still can't help myself. I've got tons of data in my head. This is the way I communicated growing up. This is the way I was enculturated. So if there's a Yankee amongst you, maybe you can do simultaneous translation of how I'm talking. I'm acutely aware that's a problem. I'm from Washington, D.C. I spent half my life growing up in New York and half my life covering politics in Washington and then running this project. So I speak fast and long. So it's a lethal combination, and especially after lunch, that's not a good thing. So I would much rather take your questions. I'll run through a bunch of stuff from our data. I never get through my slides. The slides are here. Lamar will put them up on the website and they'll reprint for you. But I'd much rather tackle questions that you have about your day-to-day lives, because sometimes our data speak very directly to that. Other times we can think together through some of the things that you're doing, and that's a much more fun kind of exchange than my just lecturing at you. So let's go that way, and I will pause every once in a while for filibuster breaks if you guys don't do me the honor of interrupting me and asking me questions. So I've sort of pulled together. Let's actually do a filibuster break right now. Is everybody clear on who I am and what Pew is and why we're doing this work? Okay, and we're actually, in the fact tank spirit, we're not cheerleading for libraries. Gates didn't hire us to be shills for you guys. They hired us because we're independent and we're nonpartisan and we're well known for doing big national surveys and things. And in part because of that independence, I think the hope of the Gates Foundation was that the data would be trusted. It wasn't just sort of bought and paid for by sponsors who are looking for a particular outcome or had their thumb on the scale. So that's what we're doing, although I must confess every day I spend with librarians is a better day for me. So I will go so far as to say that. I love librarians and on our interactions with them. I said it at the Computers and Libraries Conference about a month ago. I said, Pew's position is wherever 2 or more librarians are gathered, Pew ought to be there. So that's great that I'm here where there are lots of you. I'll run through these data. Any questions about me and Pew? What we're doing? Okay, I've lost you already. That's sad. Okay, so we have these amazing findings. We ask people what they think about the role of libraries in their communities. And with a almost singular voice. You don't get numbers like this in many national surveys about anything. Is the sun coming up tomorrow morning a good thing? You don't get 91% of people saying that the sun is good for communities, but they say libraries are important for their communities, and 76% said libraries are important to them and their families. Now, what's interesting to me about that, of course, is that the community number is bigger than the personal number. And my interpretation of that is that people think that having a good library in their community is a mark of their being a serious community and a community that cares about all of its residents. So a lot of people will say, even if I don't go to the library a lot, my situation is settled, I've got all the resources, I need to get what I want. I think others in my community need the same opportunities I do, and it's a mark of our seriousness and of our civic life that we've got a nice library. So that's part of what's going on, is that you are a representation of your communities in the public mind. How well you do your jobs reflects on your community, and people basically like it. So that's takeaway number one. You might have seen that last week we did a special report off our most recent survey that just focused on parents and their attitudes toward libraries, their practices in libraries, the things that they want libraries to do. And the sort of grand story in that finding was that parents over-index for everything. They do more, they like you more, they want more, they are deeply appreciative of what you do for their families and for their kids. So right here at the top, you know, I hope you can see, I'm backing away and using my outdoor voice for that. 94% of parents say library is important for their children, and 79% describe it as very important. If you have a child under the age of 6, those numbers jump up 5, 6, 7 more points. So it's a huge thing in your world that people have little kids. And that is an exploitable, an interesting and important thing for you to know. Because parents, especially mothers, are your biggest advocates and your best friends in your communities. Do well by them, and you've got a built-in constituency of folks who will advocate for you, who will come a lot, who will speak up on your behalf with their friends and in their networks and things like that. I've got some special Mother's data later on. But also 84% parents say the major reason they think the library is important because it inculcates a love of reading. And that, you know, that's clearly something that you guys are building lots and lots of programs around. I know there are efforts here and in other states to think particularly hard about early childhood literacy. Because there's such anxiety in the culture about whether we're doing right by our kids, because in addition to traditional literacy, reading, writing, and speaking well, there's a whole new layer of literacies about using technology and being media savvy and being a good discerning searcher and things like that. People are freaked out about what that means, and so they want to make sure that their kids get a good training in all of these new literacies as well as traditional ones, and that's one of their ways of expressing it. This is one to take home to your funders and your stakeholders. 81% of parents say that libraries are important because they provide to their kids things that are not provided at home. There are extra resources that are available at the library. You know, it's a pretty obvious point, but lots of people recognize that and think that you guys are special and important for that reason. And then there's this other finding, 71% say the major reason that libraries are important are they're a safe place for their children. Particularly true in urban communities and things like that. The urban libraries have done an amazing job in doing outreach and convincing folks that they are in the middle of deep change, and that's one of the reflections in that number. Okay, so that's point number one. You want to stop there and think more about that? Okay, I've really lost you. Yeah.
I want to know where all these 94% parents, I want to know where they are.
Yeah. They're in the stacks today. I see. When I walked in there, you know, there were a lot of parents with kids coming in here. One of the, I think maybe I'm overinterpreting your question, but a lot of people have seen those data and say, well, what the heck? You know, people love us, and they clearly say that, and they're, you know, the next thing, well, here's what they say about librarians. You know, they love librarians, and they love their library experiences, and they get help from librarians. Why are we struggling so much to get resources? Why isn't that affection clearly understood? And we don't have a grand theory of that. We have lots of hypotheses, and I bet you can come up with some. So here are the ones I've heard. The first is a sort of a squeaky wheel hypothesis. You guys aren't real eager, in many cases, to speak up for yourselves and to, you know, get in the mix of things in the scrum when resources are being battled over at the local level. The second thing that's tied to that potentially is that you guys have done an amazingly great and almost silent job of making do with less without anybody sort of recognizing that you are doing with less. You're doing the same sort of functions, you're adding new things, there's a sense in the building and in the wider, you know, your websites and things like that. Stuff is happening, so, you know, obviously things are okay, even if it's, you know, and so the presumption in the public mind might be, hey, they've got enough resources to do all this great stuff, but they don't seem to have missed a beat. A third thing is that there's definitely a disjuncture between what you guys are doing and what the general public and probably your stakeholders think you're doing. They're just, I'll show you data later on, not many people have a real good sense of everything that's going on at libraries. So there's sort of a PR and public education problem that you guys have, and you've got to get better at it. You can't think that the people who are in your stacks and the people who are visiting your website are are the only people that you can deal with. It's sort of broader outreach, tons and tons of networking. I know that some of the programs you've been talking about deal with how you're doing outreach to the small business community, doing outreach to other civic institutions. Do that even more, because you need other people to speak up for you, because you can't be at every place and every time. What would be some of your theories about that? Why there's so much affection for libraries, but not necessarily that's showing up in the funding you're getting? There's no money. That's, well, yeah, I'm sorry, the Great Recession is a big part of that. Everybody's struggling. Yeah. Good. Yeah.
I'm married to one of the best moms in the world, but moms, don't get mad at me when I say this. I don't know that their voice is taking it seriously.
Well, yeah, that, I mean, I can, there's probably something to that in some cases. But one of the striking things that we've seen in our data, quite apart from libraries, is that librarians and mothers are some of the most active bloggers in their communities, right? The people, the mommy blogs are ubiquitous, right? Every community's got a bunch of them. They network like crazy. They do the blog rolls and stuff like that. And it often starts with a mom talking about, you know, even the prenatal experience and the birthing experience and the early childhood experience. But soon enough, as life progresses, they begin to talk about things other than their family situations. They're talking about what's going on in their community. They're talking about politics. Every election season, mommy bloggers go berserk in all the ways you'd expect bloggers to go, and they've got views on everything. So I absolutely, there are probably mothers and others who might agree with that, but there's such an interesting way now that mothers have begun to use social media to be powerful storytellers and to bring their experiences into a much greater level of community prominence than they were before. And they find each other. That's the other thing that's going on. There's sort of a natural ad hoc constituency of moms that often grows up in communities.
Is there a way to, that says parents, is there data that says when parents responded, whether it was the mom or the dad?
There are data that moms outperform dads in sort of they're more likely to have a library card, more likely to use a website, more likely to come to the library, more likely to read at night to their kids. And yeah, so moms most of all, if there's an outreach strategy to begin tomorrow, if you're not doing it, it's love your local moms and find ways to do right by them. In part because they'll evangelize for you, but the other thing that a lot of libraries can exploit with the affection that they've got from all parents, especially mothers, is that you're making hard decisions about what service mix to offer, and you're trying to figure out, you know, what do we add and what do we take away, or what's the priority of our community. Moms will give you feedback on that. Ask them, and they'll respond. They don't represent the whole community, but they represent your biggest fans. And so their answers ought to have meaning, if only for that. Okay, I'll back up a slide. You know, when I first presented those data about everybody loves libraries, people said, well, okay, where do we stack up compared to other institutions? So these are Gallup data. Gallup regularly asks, in nice surveys, how confident people are in a lot of institutions. These were their most recent data. And there's the green numbers. So the U.S. military is the highest ranking institution for people that have confidence in it. And it's the single big national institution whose reputation has increased in the millennium, since the millennium began. All other institutions have seen a loss of authority, a loss of trust, a loss of confidence. Church, big corporations, banks, government has always been relatively low. And surprise, surprise, here's the U.S. Congress right down here at 13. So we don't ask that confidence question, we ask how important it is, but it still shows you that compared to lots of other major institutions or industry sectors, you guys are outperforming almost everybody. The only data I'm aware of that rival the affection people have for libraries is their votes of confidence in local firefighters and first responders in general. So again, sort of, you're doing well in the public mind, but you're not necessarily reaping some of the political benefits of that. Here are librarians' data. And then sort of a core finding that just permeates our data, and we asked a bunch of detailed questions in our last survey. Let me stop right there because this questions always comes about. We're doing big national surveys. They're done by the way that the profession of polling has done them for several generations. The new thing in the past 5 years is we and everybody else who's a good pollster has added cell phones to the mix, because a third of adults now don't have a landline phone in their home. And so you have the way to reach a third of the population, especially young people, because more than 60% have no landline at home, and poorer people and minorities, is to add cell phones to the mix. So actually our surveys have gotten better and more representative, or that we get more people in our sample and we have to do less weighting of the data to match it up to the Census Bureau description of what the proportions are in society. So that's my methodology sidetrack. Libraries have done an amazing job without necessarily thumping on their chests and announcing it to the world. You've now rebranded yourselves as your community's tech hubs. So we ask people, how important is it at your library that they do a list of things? And at the very top of the list is borrowing books and having a good reference librarians available. But there is no statistical difference between that number and that number. As many people now say that libraries are important because they provide free access to computers and the internet, as say research librarians and books are important to libraries. And just to make your life more confusing in a way that you already know, 76% say it's really important for libraries to offer quiet study spaces and service. So they love the tech, but they love the solitude and the quiet and the traditional stuff that libraries have always done. You, like lots of other industries, have this amazingly complicated, it's not a paradox, but it's certainly tension-filled. You've got people that you could identify right now as people who have loved the library forever and don't want anything to change. They love what you've done for them. They want the same services, the same connection to the library. They think of the library as the building exclusively, and don't mess with them because you'll have a riot on your hands, right? Then you've got another whole cohort who are really interested in all the new stuff you're doing. If you're adding technology to the mix, if you're adding great robust web resources, if you're allowing people to download ebooks and stuff like that, that's a completely different group, right? And so there's hardly any way to reconcile this affection for the old traditional stuff that you always do and all of the new interest in the new things that you can do. And all I can say is you're in good company. Government agencies are struggling with this across the board. Media companies are struggling with this across the board. Look at what's going on in your local newspapers as they try to sort of blend the old world and the new world and things like that. So in the sense of a 12-step support group, at least you guys are all in the same pain zone together, which is a comfort, I guess, in and of itself. So that's libraries have rebranded as tech communities and as tech centers. And then we ask people, do you use the technology in the library? And in the past year, 26% have used the computers at the library. It's sometimes the wired stuff that you offer them, sometimes they just brought their laptop or their mobile device into the library to do that. And here's what they do. And they do some obvious stuff. They do research for school and work. They browse for fun to pass the time away. They check their email accounts and things like that. Then there's this cluster of items here that's very instrumental, critical information. They're using library technology to get health information, to get information about the government and interacting with government. And then this jobs number is amazing. I'm sure you guys have seen what everybody else in the country has seen, that since the Great Recession started, the number of people who are coming to you to do job searches, to file their resumes, to see what skills they might be able to upgrade, just because they know their job's in jeopardy or they've already lost their job. I'm not surprised by many data these days when they come in. I see enough survey work that I kind of know, I can guess relatively well how things are going to come out. This was a surprising number to me. It's not the biggest number here, but 1 in 6 users of library technology have used that technology to take a course for credit and to advance their certifications and things like that. This is an awful slide, I admit it, but mostly these are data that are like stakeholder bait. You guys already know this, but you can present it to your stakeholders. These are just people who use library websites. It's the demographics of them. You'll see that it over-indexes for relatively young people. It over-indexes for people who are somewhat well-off, well-educated, and things like that. We have the same numbers for mobile connections to libraries. So 13% of people in the past year have used a mobile device to access library resources. And again, when we put these numbers out, one of the things that Pew does is we try to get press attention for this. Reporters just couldn't believe this number. That they know that it's going on in newsrooms and stuff, but they didn't really know that libraries were now high-tech institutions that had this capacity, and lots of people were treating websites the same way that they were treating media websites or research websites or things like that. I'm curious, what proportion of your website traffic now is mobile on any given day? About 10%? Yeah, that's what I was going to guess. It's between 10 and 20, depending on the institution, the character of their communities, and things like that. But that's a very typical experience. And again, sort of here are our data. Sorry, it's washed out here. But here are the ways, the most sort of simple ways and dramatic ways that parents differ from non-parents. And for us, parents are people who have a minor child at home. So anybody who's got a kid under age 18, we count as a parent. If you have a kid, but your kid is 18 or over, you're counted as an other adult. So this is just people with minor children, and they're more likely to have cards, visit the library in the past year, visit the website in the past year. We asked a question about people's increased use of the library. It was a straight-on, neutral question. And we say, in the past 5 years, has your use of the library increased, has it decreased, or has it remained the same? And about 26% said it had increased, about 21 or 2% said it had decreased. And parents, were more likely to say it had increased, and the single big reason they gave us was because they have a kid. And bringing that child to the library sort of reinvigorated their childhood affection for libraries, or their college era affection for libraries, or something like that. Teens and young adults use libraries. When we put out these data, I was not surprised by these data. You would have thought that the moon had crashed into the earth with the way people reported it. Young people still read, and they still go to libraries. Well, okay, that's pretty obvious data, but that was treated as a revelation. So again, sort of for the sake of telling your stakeholders we're still relevant to young folks who live and die by their mobile devices, these are data that you can use. And then young people still get help from librarians. Filibuster break. I'm lobbying you way too much. Questions about how people use libraries, the technology at libraries, and things like that? Oh, wow. I hope you're still with me. We did the first phase of our work online. Yeah, great.
Real quick, just to make sure that I do understand, when you talk about parents, you did not break down anything except a minor child living at home. So the extended families and the huge number of grandparents doing the parenting was all lumped into that parent.
I'm not sure how grandparents would. It's all self-reported, and I'm not sure if you're a grandparent taking care of a child whether you would have answered yes or no. I would hope, for our purposes, you would have said yes, but I'm not sure how many are in that category. The other thing that we did, and there's a lot of interesting analysis in our report, is we asked how many kids there were in the family, what the ages were of the kids, what the history of the parents was in dealing with the library as they were growing up and stuff. So people with younger children are different from people who have older children. People who have boys, or who are parents of boys, are different from people who are parents of girls, and things like that.
We see a lot of it because we have a lot of military.
Yeah.
And right now we are seeing a huge number of grandparents who are having to overnight become parents for 2 years.
And are you finding that the grandparents have a different hope that you will help them with technology? Yeah. I'm just, in part because the parents might be comfortable with it and might sort of, have already helped the child at home, but it might be grandparents turn to you and say, turn it on, I don't know what to do, and make it work and things. Yeah, that's so interesting. Yeah.
It was just interesting. You may want to firemen. Well, I sit in meetings sometimes with the fire chief, and most of the time they're bragging about not getting money either.
Yeah.
And a lot of firemen will tell you I work 2 jobs or 3 jobs. And it's kind of, I really can't put it together what it all means, but yeah, we're the nice guys. But obviously, you want somebody to come put out the fire at your house. So they're in a more critical, we're always battling. Well, we're not battling, but for our tax money, we want police, fire service, paramedic service. But then you got the firemen kind of, and of course, policemen say that. So is it a civil service or a public service thing? Or, that's not really a question, it's just a statement.
Yeah, and of course in lots of communities here, like elsewhere, that some of the core firefighter work is volunteer work. It's not municipally paid or county paid or stuff like that. So maybe there's a little bit of that going on. These are just folks who do it for the love of the community. And thank goodness for them, but we don't have to worry about their funding, right? I don't know. I'm trying to think of whether I've seen data about what municipal services have held steady as everybody else has gone down, and I'm not. Obviously, civil servants as a whole are have a very tension-filled relationship with taxpayers and things like that. I'm sure that shows up in your communities too. But there isn't a unified field theory of this, I don't think. I think it's been hard times. I mean, it's just been a particularly gruesome period in the past 5 years. And so that's probably the single more uniting thing than anything else. Okay, so before we asked people about the services that they were interested in, that they liked, we also spent about a year looking at the rise of e-reading and e-books. And I don't know whether you saw that the publishers trade group today or yesterday put out data showing that publishing is doing better than it was a couple of years ago. That there's a net profit increase of double digits, and in ebooks it's like 40% between 2011 and 2012. So the rise of ebooks is one of the things that we've documented. At the end of 2011, we saw that 16% of American adults had read an ebook. At the end of 2012, it had jumped to 23%. And when we were asked people about what book they'd read in the previous 12 months, ebooks were up, print books were down a little bit. It's still way, way, way more likely that a book reader has read a printed book than an ebook. But the shift has been occurring, and our data document that. 5% of Americans have borrowed books from libraries. I'm sure that strikes you as a particularly surprisingly low number, given what I hear from librarians all over the place, that they're just feeling pressed to keep up with the demand that already exists, whether it's 5% or 10% of their public, that ebooks are a stressor for libraries, not just because you're in the midst of these negotiations with publishers and what you can get, but there are lots of demands on you for people who've got these new devices. They want their books and they want them now. They're like queen. And we've asked folks about their awareness. Do you even know whether your local library offers the capacity to borrow an ebook? The vast majority, not the vast majority, over half of the public does not even know. They can't even say yes or no. And including people who have library cards. About half the people who have library cards. About half the people who went to the library in the past 12 months don't know that ebook borrowing is now a core function of the library. Now, in the last data we did, there was an uptick in public awareness that this was happening, but it's still less than a third of adults now know this. So again, sort of as you're feeling stressed just for coping with the demands that are already placed on you from those, the folks who want ebooks, there's just a vast audience out there that doesn't even know that this has happened in your world. These are our data on people who own ebook reading devices like Kindles and Nooks and tablet devices. So just after the Christmas giving season, 40% of American adults now have one or the other, either an ebook reader or a tablet. Tablets have obviously sort of moved ahead of ebook readers. And so that's the big driver of why there are so many ebooks being sold and why you guys are experiencing lots of people asking for them. I'm going to check something that I've heard from other libraries. In the past couple of years, 2011, 2012, the day after Christmas was said to be the heaviest day of traffic to the library website for the whole year. Is that your experience too? Yeah? Some, yes, some are scratching their heads. Apparently it's all those people who got Christmas presents, you know, ebook readers and stuff like that, trying to check out how to download Overdrive and you can get books and things like that. And the second heaviest day is Christmas Day itself. People, you know, you don't even need to be running the buildings, but if your website's up and running, there are people who are trying to get these new gadgets to work for them. As I say, we've asked people about whether they're doing more reading now that so much content is you know, in e-format, in electronic format. 30% of Americans overall, people who read books, people who read other kinds of e-content, say they're reading more because it's digitized and it's more easily available and they like it more. If you own a tablet or an e-book reader, almost half of them say they're reading more. And it's just the ease and the convenience and, you know, a common phenomenon that we now hear about is sort of information snacking, right? So you got your smartphone, you've got your ebook on it, and you're waiting for the guy from Pew to start talking, or you're waiting for the bus, or you're waiting for your doctor or your kids or whatever. You know, you dose yourself with your book that you synced from your bedside last night, and you just get you know, maybe if you're lucky, a whole chapter read or something like that. So information snacking, and especially the role of ebooks in that and smart devices in that, is one of the drivers of why people are reading more. And they're reading on a whole bunch of devices. It's not just tablets and ebook readers. 29% of ebook readers have read an ebook on a cell phone in the past year. 42 have read it on a computer. So it's not just people downloading them for the specialized devices. It's people who now know that you can do this, and they're just taking advantage of it in whatever device they happen to have available to them. And ebook readers, one of the reasons they're reading more is they're bigger book readers to begin with. One of the reasons, the big reason for them to get the device in the first place is they're book omnivores, right? They want books in whatever format, and it's not the case, and you can tell this to the publishers that you're negotiating with, it's not the case that they are platform snobs. It's not like they say, okay, every book from here on out I'm going to read is an ebook. It's not the case. They're reading printed books, they're listening to audio books, they just love books more than other Americans do, and this device enables that and facilitates that, but they are still more likely than others to have read a print book in the previous year, more likely than others to have listened to an audio book. So that, again, so that they are omnivores. And printed books are special for parents. One of the specialized questions we asked in this last survey of just the parents in our survey is, do you think, aside from all the e-content that's swirling around your kid's life, how important is it for your child, do you feel it is, to read printed books? 81% said it's important. So again, see, these are the parents that are bristling with technology themselves. They love the other stuff that you're doing. They love your website and things like that, but there's something special about that reading experience of a printed book. It's not something they want to give up. So this is adding to the confusion and pain that librarians are suffering. Here again is an awful slide, but it's a breakdown of the answers that people gave us when we asked them, if you're reading more, why? If you're reading less, why? The number one reason for reading more is a kid or a grandkid in my life. And the number one reason for going to the library less is technology gives me what I need. I don't necessarily need the institution that much anymore. And one of the things that we're going to do, the last piece of work we're going to do in this current grant from the Gates Foundation, this summer and fall, we are going to do a library segmentation, a library user segmentation survey. So we're going to talk to a lot of people. We're going to ask them about their library use in all of its dimensions. We're going to ask them about their technology. We're going to ask them about their reading experiences. We're going to ask them about other ways that they get and share information. And then we're going to do like a real market-based distinction between different types of library patrons and different types of non-library patrons. Because it's not everybody comes to the library for the same thing, and not everybody stays away from the library for the same reasons. And so we're going to try to come up with between 6 and 8 or 9 different groups of people who might be characterized to some degree by their demographics. But in many cases will be, the whole reason to do market segmentation, this is a very consumer-oriented kind of approach to doing work, is you can move beyond the standard demographics. You already know some basic stuff about men and women and young and old and different races and ethnic groups in your communities. What you don't know is sort of how this cluster of reading approaches and library use and technology use sort of interacts with each other. And that's what we're going to be doing. So you will, by January or February next year, you'll have a very rich, essentially marketplace document that will help you sort out your patrons. And we're going to obviously we share our questions already. If you ever wanted to use our questionnaire to sample your own library patrons, you can download it. You can write me, and I'll send it to you to do it. We're going to give you this questionnaire too, and these data, so you can do surveys in your own communities and compare your users to national surveys. And we're also going to do a quiz. The most popular single thing that we do on our website is offer quizzes off our surveys, and most recent one, we did some science knowledge stuff that's just blows up our website. It's so popular. People take this and then they try to figure out what's going on in science. We've done some news knowledge quizzes. We've done some technology use quizzes. This one is going to be, what kind of library user are you? And you'll answer some questions, and then we'll we'll do our little statistical analysis on our website, and we'll spit out the answer that you look like this kind of patron, and here are how many other people in the country look like you. And by the way, report these findings to your local library, and we're going to let librarians sort of use the widget from this survey to put on your own website, so you can drive people to take this quiz, and we'll probably be able, I hope technologically, I assume we'll be able to share back to you what people have told us from your communities. So I'm so jazzed about this I can barely contain myself. Okay, any more questions? Okay. Point 7 is that people want even more technology at libraries. We asked a battery of questions about, if your library offered this service, how likely would you be to use it? Would you be very likely? Would you be somewhat likely, or not at all likely to use this service? And there's sort of a uniformity to the answers. There's a little bit of variation through here. The top answer was they'd love online Ask a Librarian services. The bottom line here is instruction on how to use ebook reading devices. So a lot of those grandparents would love to come in and take a little class at the library about how the Kindle that they inherited from their a departed child is, and how to make that work. They want apps. Young folks want apps. They want apps that help them navigate library resources. But even we asked this question, would you love an app that uses the GPS device in your smartphone to help you get around the library? Yeah, they want that too. Why not? They want kiosks like red boxes around the community with library stuff in them. They actually, for all of the sensitivities that you have about user privacy, they would like it if their use of the books from your website and their search strategies and stuff, they had Amazon kind of recommendations from you guys and your sites about what they should read next. Then classes about ebooks and things like that. So we didn't ask, and I'm not sure I would do this over in a different way, but we didn't in this survey force people to pick. What would be the number 1 or 2 thing that they would really, really, really like the library to add to the service mix, and what's discretionary on these other things. Some of the data give you some clear answers, but my sense in talking to librarians is, if you engage this sort of middle group, the people who are somewhat likely to be interested in new services, if you can figure out who they are in your patron population and talk to them, they'll give you lots of good clues about what they would put at the top of their list, or what they think it would be meaningful to them or not very meaningful to them. What I've said about them is, if I were a political consultant, I'd consider them undecided voters. And figuring out which way they're going to break on when new services are being offered is probably going to give you lots of good guidance about what the service mix at the library would probably like to be. Again, here's a wonderful story, especially about urban libraries. African Americans and Latinos are more likely than whites to want all of that new technology stuff. And I think that's partly a vote of confidence in the way urban libraries have really, really jazzed things up in many cases in their communities and offered themselves in new ways to their patrons. But it was striking, every question we asked, this wasn't just a 1 or 2 questions, which would have been interesting enough in itself. Across the board, And so that's worth paying attention to. And of course, parents over-index on all this stuff too. Much more than other adults, parents want that new stuff. They want those kiosks, and they want those apps, and they want those Ask a Librarian things. And so that's you know, you can almost assume that now when you think about parents. As you are, I'll stop there again because we've only got a few more minutes and I don't want to miss any questions. Okay, we're hopeless at this point. And so the question is, okay, how do you do outreach? How do you sell yourselves, or how do you get the next increment of folks to think well of you, to use your services, to learn more about the things that you're doing? And there are some easy answers in our data of people who already think well of you and are already predisposed to think you're doing a good job. So it's not like you're trying to convert a hostile audience to love the things that you're offering that they couldn't give a hoot about. They kind of already know you. So in the past year, 53% of adults have been to the library. Okay, 47% haven't. But if you look at the number of people who say they've read a book in the past 12 months, there's a 22-point gap between them and them. So there are book readers in your communities who don't necessarily think that the library is necessarily the right place, but they obviously have a deep connection to libraries. There's a 23% gap between people who say the library is important to me and my family and the people who've actually been to a library. So again, these are people who already love you, but they don't necessarily use your facilities. 31-point gap between those who have ever visited a library. So we ask a general question, not just in the past year, in your life. So there are people who have been to libraries in the past who didn't go in the past year. And then there are these people who say libraries are really important for my community. So again, they're not folks who are challenging the legitimacy of libraries. They think very well of you. And so again, as you're thinking about stages of outreach or populations to go after, it's a target-rich environment. You guys don't have to work very hard and don't have to be very sort of in your face about what you're doing and why you're doing it. This is one that is probably going to frustrate the heck out of you, but it speaks to the affection that people have about you. The public wants you to get involved in sort of tough community problems. The top of the list here is they'd love you to coordinate more closely with local schools. I see lots of eye rolling when I talk about this. And so part of it is this sort of culture struggle that librarians and school folks have, and it's chronic. And I'm sure you guys have tried in your way. But what I think the public is saying in these data is that they're not entirely sure that the local school systems are all that they can be, and they would love librarians to be added resources for that, or pitch their voices into the mix because librarians are so trusted and have such, are held in such high esteem. The other thing that's right next to it is people want you to be involved in early literacy programs. There's just, again, there's this palpable public sense that they see all the data about the United States falling behind in sort of knowledge and technology and school performance and things like that. And there's also this sense that a whole new set of skills and a set of sensibilities needs to be part of children's growing up experiences because they're going to need these things to have any fighting chance to succeed in the world. Then these are the data that should at least ought to make you smile in wry acknowledgement. We asked people, should you get rid of some of the stacks of books, right, and create community spaces, right? Lots of libraries are being encouraged now to think of themselves as community offerings and stuff like that. Completely split verdict. There's no public, choice written in that. 20% said, yeah, get rid of some stacks and move some books, but 39%, I'm not sure that's a good idea. 36% said, no possible way. So, and I'm sure that's what you hear from your patrons. If you dare not think very dramatically about changing what's currently going on, because you'll, as I said, you'll have riots in the streets. Here's the PR problem in a somewhat different way than I described it before. Only a fifth of Americans say they feel like they know everything that's going on in a library. And 46%, so half, say I know some of what's going on. They're not clueless. But they also have this sense that there's stuff going on that they don't know about. And a third say, I don't really know that much. And so I raised that as an opportunity for you guys, because once you have exploited that idea that you're a tech hub, I mean, people have a sort of vague, visceral sense that you've made a lot of change, but showing how that operationally plays out in ways that might help them would be a really good thing to do. Here are my mothers versus fathers data. And you know, they're more likely to have library cards, visit the library website, go to the library website last year, use a mobile device, and use computers and the internet as libraries. It's just, but every question we asked in this survey, mothers, when it comes to new services or when it comes to things that they already do at libraries, they're more likely than fathers to do it. And then here's the 12th one, my final takeaway. And it's one I'm sure that's going to be troubling to you, because I know that most of you didn't get into the library world because you were anxious to make a lot of money. You got in because you wanted to serve people in communities and do right by them in their communities. Well, there are, in our data, and more in the thing that I'm describing that we're going to do this summer, it's very clear that there are big chunks of the population who are way, way, way removed from the library world and what matters there. So 1/5 of Americans never remember seeing a person in their family go to a library as they were growing up. 16% have never visited a library ever themselves, and a quarter didn't read a book in the last 12 months. Now, we won't even poll you because I know what the answer is going to be. Every one of you got in this business because you were thinking about people like this as at least one of the major reasons for why this was a noble thing to do and why this is a worthwhile way to spend your lives. Well, you're scrambling to meet the demands of the people who are already lives. You're scrambling to figure out how to change so that the tsunami doesn't, take you out. And yet there are folks in this knowledge-based economy and in the world that is shifting more and more towards how people use and understand knowledge and information who are way disengaged. And these marry up with numbers that others generate about literacy, functional literacy or illiteracy in this country. So I would just add to your burdens by pointing out that they're out there and they're in your communities, and giving them some attention and some thought will make you feel better, among other things. So here's a website that you can use. It's just, if you go to pewinternet.org, you can see our website. We've invited librarians, your staffs, others who love libraries, just sign up and we will start spamming the heck out of you to take our surveys and to participate in focus groups. We have wonderful tools that allow us to do online focus groups. So it's not, it's not a very burdensome thing. You don't have to go anywhere to do it. In the last report that we did about library services, the week before Christmas, we looked at some of the data and we said, sometimes you look at poll findings and you go, what is going on here? Or it seems to be interesting, but you can't tell why. So one of the reasons to amplify it is to do online focus groups or do other kinds of ways to sort of backfill the data gaps that you have. So the week before Christmas, we did a relatively quick survey of librarians to tell us more about the service mix and the struggles and some of the interesting things they're doing in their libraries. 2,000 librarians, all right? Remember back this, the week before Christmas. Is that a more stressful week in your year or no? No. 2,000 librarians filled out this stuff, and our report is just incredibly rich with librarian voices about what's going on and their challenges and what's the future of libraries and stuff like that. Well, you can be part of that too. And you can write to us if you can't figure out from our website how to do it. There are 3 of us who are sort of the mainstays of this library work. Here is our contact information. And my final word, maybe we'll take one more question after this, but my final word is that you shouldn't be afraid of all of this. It's disruptive, it's tension-filled, it's full of ambiguities that are not easily resolved. There are no 10-point fix-it plans in our data for how librarians can get into, a happy alignment with their patrons. But everybody else is struggling with this. When I get those wonderful cold emails and cold phone calls from folks, it could come from folks like Lamar, but it's just as likely to come from a government official, or a technology company official, or a media company official, or a nonprofit. Big nonprofits are wrestling with this same mix of questions. How do we live in this new environment? And so you're in good company. And I can't think of a better crowd to help drive the conversation and figure out the right answers to these things than you guys. So thank you very much. One more question, or one more? Yeah.
You've seen the dilemma of problem everybody, but the data is just astounding. And you use the analogy of a political pollster. Now that we have this data, you take it one step further and put us in touch with a strategist who could use this data nationally to influence legislation.
That's a great question. There are 14 or 16 national library leaders or scholars who are helping advise this work. And so some are in the ALA, some are in rural libraries, some are in urban libraries and things like that. We're hoping that they take it back to their group. So I know the ALA is feverishly working with these data to put out action items off these findings. In addition to that, the Gates Foundation works with a communications and lobbying firm called GMMB, God, Michael, Boy. It's a Seattle-based company, and it has put out a couple of one-pagers or sort of small handouts that are sort of action-oriented implications of our data. They've also created a template of a mock or a template of an op-ed article that you could send to your local newspaper, or could put on the local hyperlocal site, your patch site, or you could send to the Huffington Post and for your community and stuff like that. So there are a variety of resources that are connected to this. The other thing to say about this is that people think Pew has a special sauce for getting press attention for its work. I hate to disabuse you of that idea, but it's they hire former journalists, and that's part of the, we speak the tribal language. But there are real easy ways for you to take particularly this parent data. And I know the ALA has been particularly thoughtful in trying to encourage members to sort of say, Pew's going to come out with this report on whatever it was, May 5th. Talk to your local paper. Invite them to come to the local children's hour, where you can meet the children's reading resources person, you can meet a couple of parents, you can film if you're a camera crew and stuff like that. So there are ways in which you can sort of tie into the public newsworthy release of this stuff, but it doesn't require your paying attention just on the day of release. You can take our stuff. There's a fabulous piece in the Chicago Tribune today that just, it's 2 weeks after our release, but it just so happened to come out now, that talks about, moms being important for libraries. And so there are ways for you to be talking to the media in your community, as well as your stakeholders. We try to organize our executive summaries of our reports as sort of, pretty punchy kinds of basic data. That, again, we don't do it to cheerlead for libraries, but you guys are clever enough to figure out how it can be used for your purposes. Let's stop.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you, Lee.